Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is the Roaming Prepper channel. Thank you for joining me. In the streets right now, we're seeing a lot of geopolitical unrest. Right now, there's talk about thousands, if not tens of thousands, of protesters headed for the Democratic National Convention. There were protesters outside the Republican convention, but it was a very different tone. They're saying they're not only domestic, but uh, foreign protesters coming into the country to participate in this. This is a global movement. So the title of this video, this is Utopia. Yeah, because socialism, communism is supposed to be utopia, but is it really? Um, let's talk a little bit about Mr. Marx and the principles of communism because I don't think people understand the nature of what they're asking for. Well, thanks once again for joining me. And again, if you can or if you have not, please hit the like and subscribe and feel free to comment below the video. I normally premiere these types of videos. Sometimes I miss my own premiere because of work or something else. Uh, if I'm not in my own premiere, feel free to ask me any questions you have in the comments below the video. So, the Communist Manifesto, it's the ground baseline book, and let me hide this for a second here. Ground baseline book for the principles of communism and socialism. And in the book itself, and I encourage everyone to get a copy of the pamphlet, it's not a very big book, and read it and understand what it is that's involved in it because it is not what you think it is. Those of us who probably preppers are probably thinking, well, no, we clearly, that's why we prep so that these things don't happen. But I want to talk specifically. So, Mr. Marx, a lot of people don't realize, actually grew up in a relatively not poverty stricken environment, but he, at the time he wrote this, was witnessing that there were still aristocracies and kings and queens. Remember, he wrote this, there was still a czar in Russia. He's the reason there's no czar in Russia. There was a king in Austria-Hungary, there was a king in England, they were cousins, and there was a lot of elite possession of property. And he said, in his mind, he said this is unfair. The aristocracy has created this capitalist group who are manufacturing, and basically one's replacing the other, and the working people get screwed. That was basically the premise. What he didn't live to see was how guys like Stalin, Chavez, Castro, Xi, Putin, Khrushchev, all of these subsequent communist leaders all over the globe actually simply took the place of an aristocracy. They became like kings. They live in mansions, they have servants. Kim Jong un has a female attention squad or something like that, where basically he sends minions out to pick a dozen pretty girls and he swaps them out every year. Um, that sounds like the dementia of aristocracy and Caesars and stuff like that. So even though he may have been coming from a place of nobility, at the end of the day, in reality, communism, that structure of government centralizes so much power in one place. All you need is for a Stalin or a Castro to show up and ruthlessly kill his enemies. For those of you who've read Animal Farm, you'll remember there was the old major, the pigs, old major, Snowflake, and Napoleon. That was Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin. Old major died. That was Lenin. He was the idealist. Trotsky was a true believer. Stalin wanted the power. Stalin ran Trotsky off. In the book, Napoleon runs Snowflake off. Go read the book again, but now replace the names, and it's going to be a completely different read. I read it again a year and a half ago between grad school semesters, and I'm like, I'm going to read this. I hadn't read it since like high school, and holy cow, it just blew my mind. But anyway, I want to talk to you more about the principles. So there's a website called Marxist.org, and they literally publish the whole Communist Manifesto almost verbatim because I have the book back here, and it's pretty much the same. But I want to specifically point you guys to, so it's Marxist.org with an S at the end of Marxists. Um, and it has, archived works and whatnot. I'm going to read the section or the chapter, small chapter called What Will Be the Course of the Revolution. I want you to follow with me. Above all, it will establish a democratic constitution. That's funny they mention that. And through this, the direct or indirect dominance of the proletariat. Direct in England, where the proletarians, that is the working people, for those who've never heard that phrase before, are already the majority of people. Indirect in France and Germany, where the majority of people consists not only of proletarians, but also small peasants and petty bourgeois. Bourgeois would be like what we call the middle class. There was no middle class back then, which is part of why this doesn't work in our modern society. He goes, democracy would be wholly valueless to the proletariat if it were not immediately used as a means for putting through measures directed against private property and ensuring the livelihood of the proletariat. The main measures are as follows. Now, these are the primary principles of how they would do the revolution. One, limitation of private property through progressive taxation, heavy inheritance tax, abolition of inheritance through collateral lines, forced loans, etc. Now, that's kind of a dig at the aristocracy of the time, but if you applied it now, I couldn't leave my house to my son. When I die, my residence, my possessions pretty much go to the state, and they decide. Right there, first thing is the fallacy, believing that government workers will always do what is morally correct, because they won't. We all know that. Um, Again, not all of them are the devil, but if they can slip $5,000 of gold in their pocket while they're distributing your possessions, they're going to do it every time. Second, gradual expropriation of landowners, industrialists, railroad magnates, and ship owners, partly through competition by state industry, partly directly through compensation in the form of bonds. So basically, buy out and run off private business and private landowners. Did you catch that? Confiscation of all possession of immigrants and rebels against the majority of people. Now, number three is interesting. Who are the rebels? Who defines rebels? You don't comply, you're a rebel. You don't wear your mask, you get a rebel. You don't get a med, you're a rebel. So we heard that very same language, as you recall, during 2020. You didn't get your compliance medication, or you did and now you realized it's bad and you don't want to get your boosters, you don't want to wear your mask. Some people believed at first because they thought surely they mean well, and then we realized no, they don't. So no fault to any of them, but once you stopped obeying, are you a rebel now? You didn't obey the majority. This is why we have a constitutional republic and not a democracy in this country. I just want to point that out. I'm going to keep reading here because most of you already understand this. Organization of labor or employment of proletarians on publicly owned land in factories and workshops, with competition among the workers being abolished, and with the factory owners, insofar as they still exist, being obliged to pay the same high wage as those paid by the state. That sounds like raising the minimum income. Now, granted, we do have an issue in America with wages not being high enough, but I don't think it's a question of the minimum wage not being high enough. My question is, why is inflation gotten so bad that the minimum wage is about half of what it should be? What happened between the 1970s and now? And honestly, it's government spending, and both parties are at fault for this horse shit. Um, Centralization of money and credit in the hands of the state through a national bank with state capital, and the suppression of all private banks and bankers. Education of all children from the moment they leave their mother's care in national establishments at national cost. Education and production together. At that point, your children are simply being trained to be workers. Now, some could argue that's happening right now, which is why there's such a big movement for homeschooling, where they're teaching skills and teaching children. But here, they're like, as soon as they're off the mother's milk to the conditioning. Here's another one. Construction. Oops, sorry about that. Construction on public lands of great palaces as communal dwellings for associated groups of citizens to engage in industry and agriculture, combining in their way of life the advantages of urban and rural life while avoiding the one sidedness of each. That's probably the only thing I think actually sounded good, is having city people and country people, the urban and manufacturing, and the rural and farming and agriculture collaborating in a given area so that they can exchange ideas. That's actually not a terrible idea. I'll give them that much. The destruction of all unhealthy and jury built dwellings in urban districts. Okay, I got you. Equal inheritance rights for children born in and out of wedlock. Now, understand something here. Oh, let me expand that for a minute here so you guys can see that. So, that would be number 11, equal inheritance rights for children born in and out of wedlock. So, basically, they're saying we don't leave any children behind. We don't allow children to fall destitute. I get that. But what it does here is say marriage is not the central, or a family is not the central purpose of the creation of children. There is no family, it's the state. So the state will look at all the children equally. But you think about that concentration of all means of transportation in the hands of the nation. So basically, they control your travel. They control, sound familiar? Nobody's going to give up their car willingly, but if you keep hammering them on the head with, um, your car's, you've exceeded your carbon limit, you've exceeded your fuel limit, you've exceeded your carbon transport limit, guess what? You indirectly control the transportation. But you don't do it by controlling the car or the truck or the plane. You control the fuel and the taxation that goes with using it. And if you tax something enough, people just stop using it, in which case you've now got control. I think you guys can see where I'm going with this. So these are just some of these principles in the Communist Manifesto that actually floor me. I will say right now, to a lot of people, and let me see if I can pull it up. So, and then who will be of influence of communist society on the family? So let's bring this up because this one, oh, sorry about that. Let's share that screen again. Chapter 21, let me expand it. What will be the influence of communist society on the family? It will transform the relations between the sexes into a purely private matter which concerns only the persons involved and into which society has no occasion to intervene. It can do this since there has done away with private property and educates children on a communal basis, and in this way removes the two bases of traditional marriage, the dependence rooted in private property of the woman on the man and the children on the parents. So essentially, everyone is a worker. Now, some people say, oh, well, this is feminism. No, actually, what it does is turn the women into the production source of more workers. And here is the answer to the outcry of the highly moral Philistines against the community of women. Community of women is a condition which belongs entirely to bourgeois society and which today finds its a complete expression in prostitution. But prostitution is based on private property and falls with it. Thus, communist society, instead of introducing community of women, in fact abolishes it. So he basically states his argument is that, let me see if I can find, okay, it doesn't bring up that other chapter. Um, so essentially, you've removed private property. So your child is not yours, right? If you happen to have a child, it's the state's product. You are creating a new worker who, as soon as he's off the mother's milk, will then go for his or her training into the system. Um, this is going to fail, and it has failed. A few things. One, if I have no motivation to work harder, because no matter how hard I work, the guy next to me who's not doing anything gets the same compensation, I'm going to minimize what I do. I'm going to do the barely required box checking. I'm not going to work harder. I'm not going to work smarter. I'm going to check the boxes and collect my check because why the hell bother? I'm not going to get ahead. You also work harder because you have a family, you have kids. You take away the kids. Why would I be motivated to do more for the state? You're not. So at the end of the day, you create a bunch of drones, not AI drones. I'm talking about drones like worker bees. They exist doing what is necessary and nothing more. And that would absolutely crush innovation. It would crush science. It would it would utterly remove motivation from people for bettering themselves in life. And it's what we've seen in other countries. It's exactly why people flee these countries and come here. And another one, which I think you'll find interesting, what will be the attitude of communism to existing nationalities? The nationalities of the peoples associating themselves in accordance with the principles of community will be compelled to mingle with each other as a result of this association, and thereby to dissolve themselves, just as various estate and class distinctions must disappear through the abolition of their basis private property. So the principle here is not only we're going to get rid of private property, when we do that, then why have a family? Because it's not like you can give them anything. The kid belongs to the state, the woman belongs to the state, the guy belongs to the state. You just do whatever, and we have laws. But here it says we will force mix all the cultures so there are no cultures, because if you don't have individual cultures, you don't have nationalism, you don't have identity, you don't have culture. They all cease to exist. Now, what better way to do that than to introduce 10 million people into another country without allowing them to actually integrate into the country? You just stuff them in there and they do whatever the hell they were doing in their other country. And what you do is dissolve a nation, its ideals, its morals. Ladies and gentlemen, we're witnessing a lot of this right now. We're absolutely witnessing this. It goes on to talk about religion uh, and socialism, and basically it admits that there are three stages to socialism that ultimately all lead to communism. Like it's simply a stepping stone. So, ladies, that's your education, and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, that's your education on the Communist Manifesto. Why did I buy this book? Why did I look into this? Because this is what's going to hit the streets. And the reason I'm bringing up this conversation, and this is not prepping, this is more geopolitics, but understanding the mentality of the people who may cause civil unrest, who may cause a mob at your door is important, because if you don't understand this type of person, you don't you're at a disadvantage. You don't understand how they're thinking, how they're acting. Next time you go to a young communist or socialist and they say, "Oh, well, it's great for people," say, it creates a community of women. You simply become a product of the state. Your purpose is to work in the factory or output children like that. Yeah, trust me, it's the opposite of feminism. It's actually does not allow for people to move up. It doesn't account for motivation. Uh, you take away a person's kids, family, home, they're going to do the bare minimum just to get by every day. We're seeing it in the streets today. And yes, I think there's a huge difference between what you're seeing on the streets now in the young generations and what we saw not even with the millennials, much less before that. There was a certain consistency in the past generations, and something changed, and it's been very abrupt. And I'm I got to tell you, understanding how folks think will inform you how you may need to react to these same people if they come banging on your door. This is a reality a lot of us don't want to hear, but it's true. And again, this is more geopolitics than preparedness, but I'm a believer in prepping in the holistic, organic sense, and not organic like go to the organic store and get a kiwi. I'm talking about organic like the entire organism of society. And when you understand how a certain segment is thinking, now keep in mind this communism, or it's over here now, um, goes in complete contrast to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam in a lot of ways, because all three of them preach family, children, inheritance, heritage, culture. So they're using cultures that don't necessarily always jive to fight with each other to wear them both down. And eventually, in the chaos, an overarching government can take over. Some might argue that is the last government that will be on earth. Depends what good books you read, if you catch my meaning. But watch what's happening and understand this knowledge is something you can use if you're confronted in the street by someone to tell them, hey, do you really understand what you're pushing for here? Do you really understand what it will do to culture and your society? You're going to get true believers, no doubt. But understanding the way they're thinking gives you an understanding of how you may or may not want to prep, how you may or may not want to present yourself in the street during an emergency. You know, this shirt, if it was a real SHTF, I have communists all over, I'm going to look like a hobo with a cape. Now, under the cape, I might have a shotgun, but that's a different story. You get what I'm saying? Understand where they're going, because that gives you information as to how things could play out as we get closer to elections, as we get closer to unrest. And I'm super curious to see. I'm recording this on the weekend. I'm super curious to see what happens at the Democratic National Convention this week, because apparently Antifa and a bunch of other groups are coming out in force. And that's a hell of a big bullseye. In any case, folks, God bless. Be safe. I hope you found this educational, and we'll come back to this subject another time. You guys take care and watch yourselves out there. Things are getting weird.